The winter came down from the mountains like a living thing, breathing frost across the plains until the world hardened into silence, and in that silence stood the 90-year-old Apache woman everyone called Grandmother Naya, her back bent but her spirit straight as the cedar trees she once prayed beneath. At -25 degrees, the air itself burned the lungs, yet she moved slowly through the snow, following the weak prints of her last calf, the final living tie to a herd she had raised since girlhood. To Naya, the calf was not property, not meat, not wealth, but memory given breath, the sound of her mother's laughter, the lessons of her father, the songs of a people who believed that every living thing carried a story. The wolves had been circling since dusk, their howls stretched thin by the cold, not angry but hungry, ancient as the stars, and Naya understood hunger better than most. She had survived famine, war loss and time itself, and as the wind tore at her wool shawl, she remembered another winter long ago, when she was a child and her grandmother had taught her to stand her ground, to speak to fear as if it were a stubborn relative. She found the calf trembling near a frozen creek, its breath puffing white, eyes wide with instinct, and she placed her own small body between it and the darkness, knowing well that bones grow fragile at 90, that speed leaves long before courage does, and that the world often tests those who have nothing left to lose. Shadows moved at the edge of sight, dozens, then more, eyes reflecting moonlight like scattered embers, and Naya planted her staff into the ice, not as a weapon but as a promise. She sang low and steady an old Apache protection song her mother had sung during a blizzard, when the roof nearly gave way, and the sound carried across the frozen ground, not loud, not defiant, but unbreakable. The wolves closed in, a living circle, 100 bodies bound by need, and for a moment the world held its breath. Naya did not charge, did not scream. She remembered the teachings that said fear feeds on panic, so she fed it calm instead. She gathered brush with slow aching movements, built a small fire despite the wind, shielding the spark with her hands until flame caught, and the fire became a second heart beating in the cold. The wolves hesitated, not from fear alone but from respect for something they could not name, and as hours dragged on the old woman stood, leaning on memory, prayer, and the simple refusal to abandon what was hers to protect. Each time a shadow stepped forward, she stepped too, staff raised, voice firm, eyes clear, and the calf pressed close, learning its first lesson of survival not from strength, but from resolve. If this story is touching something inside you right now, if you feel the cold, the courage, the will to stand for what matters, remember to subscribe to the channel, because stories like this are meant to be shared, and your support keeps them alive. Night stretched endlessly, stars wheeling above like watchful ancestors, and Grandmother Naya felt the slow ache in her joints deepen, yet she welcomed it as proof she was still standing, still choosing, still alive. While the wolves paced, their breath rising and falling in a rhythm older than fear, she spoke to them as she had been taught, not with threats but with truth, telling them this calf was under her care, that there were other paths, other hunts, and though they could not understand her words, they felt the steadiness behind them, the unbroken line of a human who knew her place in the circle of life. The fire flickered, shrinking, and Naya fed it carefully, knowing that survival is often a series of small, patient decisions rather than one great act of heroism. She remembered faces of those she had lost, and instead of weakening her, those memories stood beside her like unseen allies. When the wolves tested the line again, closer now, she stamped her staff, raised her voice, and the sound cut through the night like a drumbeat, firm and unwavering. Time passed in fragments, the crack of ice, the whisper of snow, the slow warming of dawn far beyond the horizon. One by one, the wolves began to withdraw, not defeated, not shamed, but accepting that this ground, for this night, belonged to the old woman and the calf she guarded. As the first gray light seeped into the sky, the pack melted back into the hills, leaving behind only tracks and the echo of their hunger, and Naya sank to her knees, not in defeat but in gratitude. She wrapped her shawl tighter around the calf, feeling its heartbeat steady, and she laughed softly, a sound as fragile and strong as frost on grass. Rescue came later, neighbors following her trail at sunrise, finding her there, frost-rimmed but unbroken, and they would tell this story for years, not as a tale of violence, but as proof that courage does not retire, that age does not erase purpose, and that love can hold a line even against impossible odds. As Naya was helped home, she looked back once at the quiet plain and whispered thanks to the wolves, to the cold, to the life that had asked one last great question of her and accepted her answer. If this story inspired you, if it reminded you that strength comes in many forms and that standing up matters at every age, subscribe to the channel and stay with us because more powerful stories are waiting, and your support helps us bring them to life.